one of the things that, as many of you know, I used to travel a lot for about 2 years doing presentations and speaking for a nutritional company. And one of the things that I came across, it over and over and over again, was that people in this company had tremendous results. And I have to say, the products that this company were offering were, to me, one of the best in the world. And people had tremendous results from the products. However, it seemed like in every case, people still struggled with one problem or the other. Like some had skin disorders, some had libido problems, some had gastrointestinal problems. And yet, many of them did not want to try anything else for fear of appearing to be unfaithful to their companies. And this bothered me a little bit because it has always been my impression that we need to get best of everything that is out there. And your business is one aspect, your health is another thing entirely. So it is really important that you be able to separate the two when it comes to the health of your health and that of your family. And in one of our webinars, we did something on improving your body's defensive capabilities, and we kind of went through the different things that affect our health today. I'm going to show you a picture in just a little bit. But what we've seen is that many companies focus on nutrition and helping your bodies function at their best. And like I said, the nutritional company I was speaking for, did that this number 2 in a masterful way. However, the third part, which is the threats to our health and how to avoid them, it seemed to come short because although we had a tremendously good antioxidant formula, there were other things that these were not addressing. And take a look at this picture. You see that free radical damage is really one of the top things that affect your health, but that's not the only thing. The emotional stress is a big no-no. It really shuts down your immune system and your endocrine system. But in addition to that, there are chemical toxins, you've got heavy metals, biological agents, and if you remember our last webinar about 5 months ago, actually, we had someone who came to give a masterful presentation. I'm going to show you his picture in a little bit. A masterful presentation on biological agents, how a new technology that targets bacteria, viruses, yeasts, parasites, and kills them without harming the host in any way. And there's a wonderful MP3 and slides available on our website. Very soon we're going to have someone come to speak about how your body can increase its defense against radiation, including cell phones, microwaves. And they can actually scientifically demonstrate that your body is actually protected from these radiation influences when you use their product. So stay tuned. That's going to come up in a couple of weeks. So you have to see the whole picture when it comes to defense. And, of course, our guest tonight is going to focus on these two, chemicals and heavy metals especially. And I understand from even listening to some of the CDs, this product actually has some action against the biological agents and even radiation. So this is a really whiz-giz product we're looking at very soon. Here's the man who did our presentation on bugs, and again, the information is on the website. Threats, toxins, chemicals, and all the other things, bugs, all affect what we call the central governing system of the human body. That's the nervous system, endocrine system, and immune system especially. Now remember, we have over 12 different systems, but these three systems, these three up here, control the other 9 or 10 systems. So of first importance, we understand how this affects us and other people. And one of the things that I'm really, if I can get this thing moving, there we go again. Pressed the wrong one. All right, I'm sorry about that. This is, okay. I forgot to put the picture of a family there. Okay. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is really our kids. We know, first of all, that many chronic diseases, they persist because toxins and chemicals are hidden in our bodies, and our bodies have no way to get rid of them. And that's why we have, like I said, chronic diseases. But also, what I'm really concerned about is really with the kids. These kids that are being born today are being born into a very, very hostile environment. And these toxins are affecting their premature brains. Remember, our brains are only fully developed when you get to be 25. And a lot of damage is being done to these kids' brains as they grow and as they indulge in pops and foods and fast foods and junk foods. And I think one of the worst things is not just the food that they take, but also the TV that they watch and the video games. I think these are polluting our kids a great deal. So really, it's really, really important that, especially if you have young kids, you know how to protect them from these threats that are plaguing us tonight in this day and age. Tonight we're going to have, along with our guests, we're going to have our other special guest, Dr. Norman Marvin. You know him from our presentation on omega-3 fatty acids. He did a masterful presentation. And until tonight, he held the record for the most number of attendees for any of our webinars. Now it looks like Mr. Deitsch has beaten him to it. But Dr. Marvin, thank you so much for joining us on the webinar.
Glad to do it.
And before we go on, I just want to say a quick thank you to Dean Nunnally, who has really been the one who helped set this whole thing up in the first place. Here's how it has worked. Sherry has a question. Sherry needs information. Sherry gets on my case. I get on Dean's case, and then Dean gets on Rik's case. So, Dean, if you're out there, thanks a lot. We really appreciate what you're doing. And now it's time for Mr. Deitsch. Sherry, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Yes, I'd love to introduce him. Okay, Rik Deitsch is the Chief Executive Officer of NutraPharma Corporation, a biopharmaceutical company specializing in the acquisition, licensing, and commercialization of pharmaceutical products and technologies for the management of neurological disorders, cancer, autoimmune, and infectious diseases. He also serves as the president of NDA Consulting Incorporated, a biotechnology research group that provides consulting services to the pharmaceutical industry. He holds a BS in chemistry and an MS in biochemistry from Florida Atlantic University and has conducted research in collaboration with the Duke University Medical School Comprehensive Cancer Center and the Cleveland Clinic Cardiology Department. He is an adjunct professor and teaches several courses in Florida for Florida Atlantic University's College of Business and Continuing Education. He is the co-author of 2 books, You Are Age-Wise, A Guide to Healthy Aging, and Visible Killers, A Guide to Environmental Toxicity. And on that note, we will hand it over to you, Rik. We are so honored to have you with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I think I did this right, but for some reason it's not a clean screen for me. I still see the bar in the bottom. Is that right? Do you see that?
Let me switch it back to David. Can I switch it back to you real quick?
Sure.
Okay, I'll switch it back to David, then we'll switch it back to you, and then you can choose the clean screen.
Okay. Oh, there's me. Okay. Okay, for some reason not working. Oh, there it goes. Okay. I'm good.
All right. Look.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to the webinar. As you just heard, I am the co-author of the book Invisible Killers, The Truth About Environmental Genocide. And my point was, several years ago, I was working with Dr. Stuart Lonke, who's a pulmonologist in Los Angeles, and you can imagine how busy a lung doctor is in Los Angeles. So he's one of the busiest physicians I know, working in some cases as much as 80 or 90 hours a week. Sees a lot of occupational exposure cases. So we decided to start collecting information about what the toxins were in the environment, where do they come from, how do they affect us, et cetera. And it was very frustrating for us because there was no one place that had this information. We were scouring libraries, we were looking at the internet, we were downloading documentaries, but it was really kind of frustrating because there was no one place where we could gather this information. So we came up with the idea that, hey, we should write the book. And the book should be very straightforward. What are the toxins in the environment? Where do they come from? How are we exposed to them in the food, in the air, in the water? When we're exposed to them, what do they do in our bodies? What are the natural processes of detoxification? How do they increase our risk for disease and dysfunction? And then we wanted to offer hope, because so many times when you read books like this or you see documentaries like this, they're just there to scare you. And we didn't want to scare people. We wanted to empower them. We wanted to give them information, arm people with information that they could take away and say, how do I avoid these toxins? How do I mitigate the risk of exposure? And most importantly, how do I detoxify? How do I get these things out of my body? And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is exactly that. What are these toxins, and then really how do we detoxify? So the first question, of course, is, are you toxic? I ask this live in my seminars. I try to ask it this way: are you toxic? And people look a little confused. So I say, well, let me ask it this way: who in the audience here, who is pristine? Who believes they are pristine? And I got to tell you, 99% of the time, no one says anything. People know that they're toxic. I think it's important because people understand that we live in a toxic environment, that there's no clean place left on earth, and that this is better living through chemistry. We love our cars and our cell phones and our computers and our modern living, and so we feel that toxic exposure is just something we have to deal with. But every once in a while, there's someone who says, I live in a pristine environment, there are no toxins in me. So this guy here in his field of flowers tells me he's not toxic. He lives in a pristine environment. As he's telling me this, a crop duster was flying behind him in the field. And I thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. He really thinks he lives in a pristine environment. So I had to go over exactly what the crops were being dusted with, exactly what he was being exposed to, and besides that, everything else that we're exposed to really on a daily basis. The next question I usually ask is, how many people in the audience breathe? And, most people raise their hands. How many people drink? How many people eat? And the fact is, if you eat, drink, or breathe, you're exposed to toxins. Now, I could take hours and hours to go over each individual toxin. What I'm going to do is just outline a couple of examples. First of all, when we talk about food, for the most part in our food, we're talking about hormones, pesticides, herbicides, things used in the growing of food, including animals. Now, I don't want it to cause any real alarm. I get in a lot of trouble when I talk about things like organic fruits and vegetables because people are very, very much enamored of the concept of organic fruits and vegetables. Understand what the definition is of organic. Organic means grown free of herbicides, pesticides, and genetic modification. That's exactly what organic means. And a lot of people wind up getting certified that their foods are organic. Well, 3 years ago, the FDA conducted a study and was published in the Journal of Food Toxicology, where they looked at hundreds and hundreds of places that sold both regular fruits and vegetables and organic fruits and vegetables. And by far, they found more herbicides and pesticides on the organic labeled fruits and vegetables. And of course, the organic labeled products were 2 to 3 to 4 times more expensive than the regular fruits and vegetables. Now, the answer is this. The reason for this is that just because you grow a fruit or vegetable free of pesticides and herbicides doesn't mean that the wind doesn't blow, the water doesn't flow, and those pesticides and herbicides eventually wind up on those fruits and vegetables. And then additionally, the normal fruits and vegetables are washed in chemical baths to try and remove some of these pesticides and herbicides, and the organic fruits and vegetables are not allowed to be washed in chemical baths, so those things wind up staying on those products. Now, I'm not saying if you have a local farm, a local organic grower, if you're growing them yourselves, great. If it's not broken, don't fix it. If you love your provider, that's fine. But understand the great majority of tested products out there in the marketplace didn't see a huge difference between organic labeled products and normal products. My contention is to buy the normal fruits and vegetables. Of course, check for genetic modification, which can be an issue in some cases, and just make sure you're washing your fruits and vegetables. We get E. coli scares every year. We get all sorts of bacterial scares. Now we're in the middle of a peanut salmonella scare. Now, salmonella is a little different, but when you're talking about E. coli, that's entirely due to people, basically workers in the fields that are defecating in the fields because we don't give proper sanitation in most of the fields. And so my contention is if we simply washed our fruits and vegetables, it would cut down on almost every case of E. coli out there. Certainly cut down at least 80% of the cases. So wash your fruits and vegetables. Even if it says pre-washed, like those salad bags, wash them. Just wash them in warm water, and there are some vegetable washes that you can use that's going to clean all that stuff off. Okay? Now, hormones are a different issue, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but understand that Many chickens and cows are grown with female hormones to increase their size and their growth. In fact, it's leading to a phenomenon in this country, which is really kind of startling, and that's the early pubescence, mostly of women. If you go to the average high school now, I couldn't believe this. I went to my nephew's high school a few months ago, and these high school girls looked like they were 35 and divorced. I couldn't believe it. And we call it the red meat theory. It's because they're getting so much estrogen in their meat and their chicken that they're actually developing much earlier than they normally would have. I know that girls did not look like that when I was in high school. I know that for a fact. I would have remembered. So understand this, and this is where I differ when it comes to organic, because organic chicken, free-range chicken, organic beef is grown without the use of hormones and without the use of estrogens. And so in that case, I think that's better certainly better for our children. Understand, too, that if you get too much of certain hormones, like too much estrogen, it increases the risk of hormone-sensitive cancers. In women, that would be breast, uterine, ovarian, and cervical cancer. So you have to watch your intake of those hormones as well. And then, of course, in the air and the water, we have things like automobile exhaust, cigarette smoke, heavy metals, again, herbicides, pesticides, volatile organic compounds. All of us use household chemicals, and you have to see what is in those household chemicals. And things have changed over the years, but there's some things that are staples for household chemicals. For example, bleaches and things of that nature, which for the most part are not unhealthy, but when you breathe some of that stuff in, it can cause a better environment for the uptake of heavy metals. And then gasoline and oil certainly get into your body. Petroleum-based products can hurt the skin over time. If you've ever pumped gas, if you just do this, hold your breath, so you don't, you're not breathing in outside fumes. Hold your breath and just let a drop of oil, a drop of gas on your hand. Within 5 seconds, you will taste it in the back of your throat. That's how fast these volatile organics get into your body and circulate. And the body tries to expel it through quick elimination in the mouth. It's expelled much like ketone bodies, for example, acetone, and so you tend to taste it very quickly. So that just tells you how this stuff gets in and circulates very quickly. And understand that we use petroleum-based products in a lot of personal care products and things of that nature. So when I talk about toxic skincare products, I'm mostly concerned with things that have petroleum bases. But aside from that, there's a lot of products out there that are just not tested for bacterial content because they're topical. And in many cases, it's not a big issue with topical bacterial infection unless you have a cut or a scrape or other insult to the barrier that your skin provides. But regardless of that, you should be aware of these things and keep an eye on the news, because all the time we see lipsticks and creams and stuff that have all sorts of bacterial growth. So be aware of these things. Now, again, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm simply trying to make you aware of where these things come from. So let's talk about sources of heavy metal contamination. We'll talk about lead for the first thing. Now, in the old days, lead almost always used to come from paint and lead pipes. In fact, the Latin word for lead is plumbium, which is why the chemical symbol is Pb. And we used to use lead in pipes for plumbing, which is why it was called plumbing, and we call plumbers plumbers because of their use of plumbium. So I knew you'd learn something on this webinar tonight, and that's, you can take that home. But
I didn't know that before.
Well, we stopped using lead pipes for a long time ago, but we still use lead in the joints. So if you have air sitting in the pipes for a while, it's going to take on some lead. So the recommendation is if you're going to use that water for cooking, you're going to drink the water, let it run for 30 to 60 seconds before you use it, because that'll at least get out the majority of the lead that's soaked into the pipes. Now, of course, a lot of us use PVC pipes nowadays, and that's not an issue. Lead paint is certainly used in older buildings. Lead gives paint a great luster, a great shine. It makes paint last longer. So it was used in paint for many, many years. In 1978, we outlawed the use of lead-based paint, but the paint manufacturers, they didn't want to just throw away their paint. They weren't required to. They were just told they couldn't sell it in the United States anymore. So they wound up exporting all of that paint to what we mostly call the third world at that time, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, and parts of Africa. And we figured, great, the paint's gone. It's not going to affect us. But now all of that lead paint is coming back in the United States in the form of imports. Last year alone, Walmart pulled over 2 million toys off the shelves because they were painted with lead-containing paint. Now, there's a couple of problems. First of all, the lead paint is used primarily in children's toys because it's so brightly colored. It's great for painting kids' toys. The other major problem with lead paint is it tastes good. Lead-based paints have a sweet taste when they hit the tongue of a child, and so the kids tend to chew on it and chew on it and chew on it to get that flavor. which is why kids also would eat paint chips. When toddlers would get a piece of paint chip, they say, wow, that tastes pretty good. Now, I guess you guys all want to run out and eat paint, but it's not a good thing. It's going to build up in the bone, increase risk of osteoporosis, increase risk of neurologic dysfunction. Now, this is the warning. If you have a kid and he has a brightly colored toy and he's chewing on it, there's a risk that toy probably has lead. Now, there's lots of government websites, including the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, that monitors things like this. And so just make sure if you have toys for your children, make sure that toy, if it's made in China, does not have lead-containing paint as part of the toy. And understand that China is making great strides in preventing this from happening in the future. They've changed a lot of their processes and their validations for exports, and we're seeing less and less of that coming out. Now, besides that, really our number one exposure to lead is automobile exhaust. Even unleaded gas contains lead. And so if we live in an inner city, if we have a lot of automobiles around us, then we're getting a lot of lead on a daily basis simply from that automobile exhaust. Now let's look at mercury. By far, our number one source of mercury contamination is in seafood. Now, mercury is a natural toxin. For the most part, it comes from volcanic eruptions. So when a volcano erupts, the mercury goes into the ocean. It gets taken up by bacteria and plankton. Shrimp and small fish eat the bacteria and plankton, and big fish eat the smaller fish, and so on and so on. And the mercury tends to bioaccumulate in the largest fish. So as a function of percent, you're going to get a lot more mercury in bigger fish. So the recommendation is to try and eat less of the larger fish over time. In other words, no more than 2 to 3 servings a week of the largest fish, the marlin, the sailfish, the shark. In some cases, we talk about salmon and tuna. The larger fish tend to have the most amount of mercury. Now, it's a very hard question to answer because people say, well, don't those fish also have omega-3 fatty acids? Aren't they really healthy for you? And yes, they are. But by the same token, they can also have a lot of mercury. And so we balance the good with the bad. And by the same token, I would also recommend doing something to actively remove the mercury from your body, especially if you eat a high seafood diet. Now, other sources of mercury in the past have been dental amalgams. Certainly, there's an argument about how dangerous or safe mercury-containing amalgams are. Last year, actually in October of 2007, the American Dental Association finally stated there might be an issue with mercury-containing dental amalgams, and they're looking into it. And you can understand their reticence because if they admit that there's a problem with mercury-containing dental amalgams, then who's responsible? It could actually trigger literally millions of lawsuits based on the use of dental amalgams over the last 100 years. And so until there's legislation that states that no one can sue their dentist for the filling that they got 40 years ago, then they're probably not going to take steps to say that this is an issue. Though more and more dentists are going to composite material, if for no other reason than it's cosmetically more attractive. You know, why do you want a big silver filling if you can have a white one that's going to last pretty much as long as that filling? Now, that being said, I'm not a big fan of removal of mercury fillings because the removal process utilizes a high-speed drill and can actually liberate mercury vapor. And so unless you have a dentist that is trained at the proper removal of those fillings, which includes using dental dams and a fume hood to capture that mercury vapor, then I don't recommend removing the mercury filling. They will fail in 12 to 15 years, and when the filling is coming out and failing, simply replace it with a composite. Otherwise, if you insist on having the filling removed, make sure you go to a dentist that's certified in the proper removal of that filling. And then lastly, mercury has been and is being used as a preservative in vaccinations. Mercury is a component of thimerosal, which is a preservative used in several vaccines. Because of this, it's become very much the center stage in what people are calling the war on autism. Back in the 1970s, 1980s, rates of autism were as little as 1 in 3,500 to 4,000 births. And now they say it's in as much as 1 in 150 births. There's some argue about the statistics. Many people believe that it's because we increased the amount of vaccinations our children received in the 1980s without anyone adding up the amount of mercury they were getting. Of course, there's arguments on both sides of the fence where they say, well, if it's true that it's caused by mercury, how come all children didn't wind up with autism spectral disorders? Well, you'll understand that more later in my lecture when I talk about the ability to excrete. how some people are good excretors and some people are poor excretors. It just so happens that the children who are the worst excretors of heavy metals tend to be the ones that are most likely to suffer from autism spectral disorders. Now, because of that, I don't blame simply the vaccinations. I blame the toxic environment we live in, which includes vaccinations, but also includes things from our diet, from the air, from the water, and more. Now, certainly when these children undergo active chelation and remove these heavy metals, their symptoms tend to improve over time. So certainly mercury has something to do with it, and I believe mercury in anything introduced in the body is probably a bad idea. Now, because of that, thimerosal has been outlawed in most states. It's still in some products in some states and some vaccinations. It's still in flu shots. So if you get a flu shot, chances are there's thimerosal in that flu shot. You have to personally request a mercury-free shot if you want to get a flu shot without thimerosal in it, and that can take 2 to 3 weeks to order. So if you do get a flu shot every year, then you might, in advance, want to order a mercury-free shot. Now, I'll go over the next couple very quickly. Cadmium is, among the heavy metals, the most carcinogenic. It's the one that's most likely to cause cancer among all the heavy metals. Cadmium, for many years, was primarily found in cigarette smoke, especially secondhand smoke, which is one of the primary dangers of secondhand smoke. Now, more recently, cadmium has been being found more and more in the environment. In the late 1980s, we introduced lithium cadmium and nickel cadmium batteries, NiCad and LiCad batteries. Those batteries have now found their way into landfills, and they're making their way into the water supply. It's what we call a rising toxicant, something that wasn't really prevalent in the past, but now we see all over the place. And you have to be aware of that. On a daily basis, we're going to find more and more things that weren't around and are around now because of changing technology. So be aware of that. Keep watching the news. Keep watching things like the Environmental Protection Agency website to see what is coming, what else is being discovered in the environment. Now, because of that, cadmium is becoming more and more something that we're aware of, and we're creating filtration systems and water detoxifying systems that are targeted at removing the cadmium, which can be incredibly dangerous over time. Lastly, I want to talk about arsenic as part of my fearsome 4. And for many, many years, the biggest issue with arsenic was well water. Arsenic is very prevalent in the environment. It's found in almost all well water throughout the world. But many people, many systems, use some sort of cationic exchanger to remove the arsenic, or reverse osmosis to remove the arsenic. So it's really not that big an issue in drinking water in developed countries. But our number one exposure, at least in the United States, to arsenic is in treated lumber. If you have wood that's used outdoors for decking, for fences, for picnic tables, it's been treated with arsenic to try and prevent termite damage or other insect damage. In fact, one 12-foot 2x6 board has enough arsenic in it to kill 200 adults. It's a huge amount of arsenic used in these products. If you go into your local Home Depot and you go to the section for outdoor wood, for treated wood, you'll see a big sign on it, a red sign with stripes on it that says, "Warning, wood contains arsenic. Wear mask and goggles while working with this wood. Do not breathe in dust. Do not burn wood. Wash hands before eating." And yet we build our decks, we build our picnic tables, and we take that sign off the deck, off the wood. We don't leave it on. We don't warn anybody that, by the way, this wood contains arsenic. You know, David, my big joke is that I ask the audience if they still have that tag on their beds that say, "Do not remove under penalty of law." Because everyone leaves that tag on their beds because it says, "Do not remove." And yet here's a sticker on the wood that tells you this wood could kill you, and we take off the sticker. And that should certainly be on all this wood. And then, you know, our children are going to parks and eating picnics on these picnic tables, on wooden tables. And understand the skin is a pretty good barrier against arsenic exposure. But when the kids rub their eyes or they eat, they're getting the arsenic then through their mouth and through their eyes. Additionally, our pets, companion animals, will play with chew toys. They'll roll it around the deck and they'll chew on the toy, and they wind up getting huge doses of arsenic as well. So the number one source of arsenic exposure for our children and companion animals is, in fact, this treated wood. So some things we can do, first of all, understand if you have wooden decks, if you have wooden picnic tables, understand that there is a risk involved. Certainly don't burn or cut those decks without proper protection. And then if you're going to eat on that picnic table, put a tablecloth down. So you're not attracting the arsenic to the food. Don't give your pets chew toys to play with on the deck. It increases their risk of exposure by chewing on the chew toy and rolling it around the deck and picking up that arsenic. So there are things you can do to try and reduce the exposure to your children and your animals. Now, everything I told you so far is just the tip of the iceberg. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I love this image. For those of you when the image uploads. You know, when you see an iceberg, you're only seeing about 10% of the iceberg. 90% is underwater. What I'm talking about is just what we know about. You know, there are more than 13,000 new chemicals registered in the database of the United States on an annual basis. 13,000 new chemical entities. We don't know what all those chemicals do. We certainly don't know what they do in combination. And even though we can tell you single toxicity, we certainly don't understand what happens when you mix these things together. We can't possibly. We don't know what every possible modality will be, what every possible combination will yield. And so we learn as we go and as research is conducted. But it's a very scary thing, especially because we have so many new chemicals, synthetic chemicals created on a daily basis. And then even natural. I mean, we're discovering new natural chemicals as we explore more and more of the world and understand more about plants and animals. And as we introduce those, they're new drugs. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Teflon. I mean, for 60 years, we've used Teflon, and everyone thought it was completely safe. And now just recently, we've been told that it does build up in the body. If you use Teflon cooking components, that Teflon will build up in the body. And then similar component is in Scotchgard, which is used in stain resistance for carpeting and for furniture. It's on everything. And that just last year, Scotchgard was added to the list of potential carcinogens on the Environmental Protection Agency database. So these are things that we know about. It's prevalent in the environment, but we're just learning that it could be toxic. And as I said before, cadmium is a rising toxicant. We want to be responsible. So people are starting to use these fluorescent light bulbs, these curly Q light bulbs, which are small fluorescent bulbs. Great. They use less power. They give out more light. They'll last longer, so you don't have to replace them as often. But they also contain mercury. And over the years, they're going to hit the landfills, and we're going to wind up with the mercury issue simply from the overuse of these small fluorescent bulbs. So we have to take a much wider view of things when we're talking about conservation. We have to realize that if we make something, eventually it's going to be wasted, and what do we do with that waste? And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now also, everything I've talked about so far are toxins that we're exposed to as we grow and breathe and eat and drink. But the fact remains that we're born with a lot of toxins in our bodies. In a study conducted by the Environmental Working Group in cooperation with the American Red Cross, they looked at the umbilical cord blood from newborns. They found, on average, 200 toxic compounds in the umbilical cord blood of newborns. Over 70 of those compounds were potentially carcinogenic. Now, we know that toxins, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, are passed on through the umbilical cord blood to infants. Additionally, as women breastfeed, they're passing on those toxins which are expressed in breast milk. We've seen especially volatile organic compounds expressed in breast milk over time. Because of that, we try to tell pregnant nursing women that it's really a non-choice to do something about limiting their exposure to toxins and heavy metals and to do something about actively detoxifying. If you look at history, you look at our body burdens, which is the amount of toxins that are stored in our body over time. Our body burden has increased dramatically, generation to generation, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's getting worse and worse. I can give an example. There's a huge lawsuit going on in Mexico right now among banana plantation workers. Apparently, the pesticide that's used on the bananas is causing reduction in sperm motility and sperm count. And so birth rates are plummeting among the people that work in the plantations. Now, the scariest thing is that their children also have low sperm motility and low sperm count, which means, and these children don't work in the banana plantation. They've never been near the banana plantation. So whatever damage is being done is done at a genetic level, which is being passed on to the next generation, increase in cellular damage and DNA damage. So if we can have pregnant nursing women understand the dangers of this and actively, or just women of childbearing years, actively detoxify, actively do something about lowering their body burden, we could, for the first time in hundreds of years, reverse this trend and have a generation that's less toxic than the one before it. And so this really is one of our missions, trying to engage especially pregnant nursing women to understand the dangers because of their toxic environment. Now, I'm going to be a little overly simplistic about this. I am a biochemist, and I don't want to turn this into simply a biochemistry lecture. But I want to talk about what these heavy metals specifically do in the body. You see, now first, understand that heavy metals do get stored in the body in different places. Depending on where they're stored, they can cause all sorts of damage. And I'll discuss that a little later. But primarily, what heavy metals do is inhibit natural functions, mostly by displacing the natural metal from where it's supposed to be. As an example, first understand that there are good metals, things like calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium. These are metals that are necessary for life. Okay, these are metals that are necessary to allow for metabolic function. Most of those metals will bind inside enzymes or proteins as cofactors for those enzymes and proteins. What heavy metals do is they can either block the uptake of those healthy minerals, healthy metals, and so we wind up with deficiency, or they can block the enzyme site, the active site, from those good metals. And when they do so, they reduce metabolic function. And I'm going to give a couple of examples to try and illustrate this. The first one is I'm looking at a molecule of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is the energy currency of the body. When you need something done, you spend ATP to do it. Now, the main body here is adenosine, which is a nitrogenous base. It's found in DNA, it's found in RNA, it's all over your body. Attached to it are not one, not two, but three phosphate groups. And phosphate is simply phosphorus surrounded by oxygens. A phosphate group has a negative charge. And so you have to ask yourself, how do three negative charges line up like that? See, like charges want to repel. And so this first bond, with where the first phosphate attaches the second, that's a very high energy bond. But then this next one, the third phosphate, that last bond is a very high energy bond. It's a bond that just wants to break. It wants to fly apart. What stabilizes it is magnesium. Magnesium carries a positive charge, and it stabilizes that last bond, that labile bond. In fact, active ATP is called MG-ATP, magnesium ATP. Now, when you need to use that ATP, when you need to use the energy, the magnesium releases, that bond breaks, and it releases energy into the environment, and work is accomplished. That's how most things are done in the body. Now, my best example of this is imagine an archer with a bow and an arrow. Okay, the archer knocks the arrow to the bow. He pulls back on the string. Now, imagine all that energy. There's a huge amount of energy now stored in that string. It's just like the magnesium, stabilizing the energy of the ATP. Now, release the string. Let it go. The string snaps, the arrow flies, and work is accomplished, just like the magnesium releasing the bond of the ATP. Now, the problem is magnesium can be displaced, usually by something like mercury. When mercury surrounds that bond, surrounds that phosphate, it does it usually irreversibly. And what happens is that ATP becomes useless. And so this is one of the reasons that heavy metal poisoning reduces metabolic function, because you cannot have active ATP in the presence of things like mercury. So I'm going to give an example, and I'll talk about this concept of chelation a little later. But here is a chelator, a cage of what's known as a zeolite, which carries a negative charge. And what happens when you use something like this zeolite? Well, it's going to capture the heavy metal that's at the binding site. It gobbles it up, removes it, and then new ATP, you simply have magnesium, bind to that site. And so it's a very simplistic view of this, but the fact is, if you remove the heavy metals, now that compound can be active and metabolic.
I like that. I like
the
that.
Concept, thank you. This is my 5-year-old daughter's favorite slide.
Oh, really?
She can watch it over and over again. But the concept here is pretty simplistic, but you have to understand, if you need energy to undergo metabolic function, you need to remove those heavy metals that can inhibit the use of that energy. Now, of course, this is overly simplistic. When the mercury binds, it's usually covalent and irreversible. And so what happens is that ATP simply gets recycled, and new ATP comes. But if you have new molecules of ATP, without the mercury to inhibit it, that magnesium can get to its binding site, and you wind up with better metabolic function. I'll give one more example of this. This one's not animated, but I'm going to talk about zinc finger proteins. Now, zinc finger proteins are called zinc finger proteins because there's a zinc right in the middle of the protein. The zinc holds the shape of that protein and allows it to do its function. Zinc finger proteins are necessary for cellular replication. Anytime a cell has to replicate itself, make copies of itself, zinc finger proteins come in and help copy the DNA. This is important for a host of different things. For example, healing processes. You break a bone or you have a cut or a scratch, you need new cells to heal. Additionally, if you are under attack by a virus or a bacteria, you have some sort of insult, you need more white blood cells, more macrophages to defend yourself, to fight the infection. Zinc finger proteins will come in and help copy those white blood cells, help create more white blood cells to fight the infection. This is one of the reasons you might suck on a zinc lozenge when you have a cold. More zinc finger proteins, you're better able to make more white blood cells. So it kind of makes sense when you start looking at the mechanisms. Now understand.
Hey, Rick, I've been, sorry to interrupt, but I've been told that zinc is the most important mineral for the immune system. Is this why?
Yeah, that would be the primary use of zinc in the immune system is to facilitate zinc finger protein metabolism. Okay.
Wow.
And also zinc. Some people become hypercupremic. They wind up with excess copper, and zinc prevents copper absorption. So if you're getting zinc in your diet, you can avoid getting too much copper. And that's especially true in places like China and Australia, where there tends to be a lot of copper in the diet. There's a lot of competition there. But understand this, for proteins and enzymes to work, they have to have a specific three-dimensional structure. We call the concept lock and key. Just like a key fitting a lock. If the key is damaged or bent, it won't turn the lock. It won't work. Well, for these enzymes and proteins, they have to have the exact three-dimensional structure so it can fit a binding site and be able to turn, just like a key turns in a lock. If the structure changes at all, we call that denaturing. It's denaturing the protein, denaturing the enzyme. It no longer works. Well, zinc can be displaced from zinc finger proteins, usually by arsenic. When arsenic gets in there, arsenic is smaller than zinc, and it changes the shape of the protein. And so the protein no longer works. It's inhibited. This is one of the reasons that when we have arsenic poisoning, our immune system shuts down, our metabolic processes don't work, our healing, we don't heal as well. It's because we have a downregulation of these zinc finger proteins. Now, what happens when you get rid of the arsenic? Well, you know, it's so funny that people take chelators and they say, I can't believe that I did this, and this product made me heal, and this product made me fight infection and fight colds. All it really did was allow you to do what your body's supposed to do. Your body's supposed to manufacture zinc finger proteins, it's supposed to heal, and it's supposed to fight infection. But we've insulted it by the uptake of all these toxins and heavy metals. So what I try to tell people is in this case, we're not trying to treat disease or treat symptoms of disease. All we're trying to do is get the body back to where it can actually fix itself. A cleaner, healthier body fixes itself. So let's talk about how the body really detoxifies, how it's supposed to work. The first step we call either barrier or elimination. The body tries to prevent toxins from getting in. It does in a variety of ways. Our skin is a barrier. The hair in our nostrils is a barrier. The cilia in our lungs is a barrier, and our bronchial tubes. Our digestive tract as a whole is a barrier to entry. And this is hard to understand for a lot of people, but for the most part, when things are in our digestive tract, they're not really in our body. You know, until they cross into the bloodstream, they can be eliminated pretty quickly just by being pushed out through the colon and the distal bowel. Of course, this requires a healthy digestive system and a healthy colon. So we have lots of barriers to entry. If a product still gets in, if a compound still gets in, there's a simple elimination process. You cough, or you sneeze, or you go to the bathroom. These are very quick elimination processes. And a lot of toxins are either prevented from getting in through barrier or eliminated quickly. Now, if a toxin still gets in, it can't be eliminated, it got past the barrier, the next thing the body tries to do is called transformation. This is a liver process where the liver tries to transform the toxin to make it more water soluble so you can simply eliminate it through the urine. And there are many, many different transformation pathways, more than 26 of them. They all require all sorts of cofactors, dietary cofactors, and they all require a healthy liver. So if you have any kind of liver damage, if you have hepatitis, if you have cirrhosis because of alcohol or because of virus, then you're not going to properly transform, and you're going to build toxins much quicker in the body because you're not going to be able to transform those toxins and remove them. But understand this process of transformation. It takes enzymes, proteins, all sorts of cofactors, and makes the toxin more water soluble so it can be eliminated quickly. And this is an important concept because we're going to use it for other types of detoxification. Now, if a toxin is not eliminated, if it can't be transformed, there's only one other choice, and that's called sequestration. The body tries to hide the toxin someplace where it can do less damage. It tries to hide the toxin in what we call metabolically inert or metabolically inactive tissue. For example, fat or bone. Different toxins wind up in different places. For example, lead loves to go into bone, where it displaces calcium, and over time can increase the risk of osteoporosis. So people who remove lead, who actively remove lead from their bodies, can increase bone density over time. And we've seen this in many cases. So people who are osteopenic or osteoporotic, one of the things they should actively do is try to remove lead from their bodies through some form of active chelation. Things like mercury, arsenic, they like fat, but they all usually wind up on the fatty sheaths around the nerves, the myelin around the nerves, or inside the brain. And because of that, they can cause all sorts of neurologic damage when they're able to get back into circulation. Things like aluminum has been found inside the brains of Alzheimer's patients. Now, we don't know if aluminum causes Alzheimer's, if it makes it worse, but it's been found inside those neurofibrillary tangles, and when patients actively remove the aluminum, symptoms seem to improve. And so certainly it has something to do with the progression of the disease, whether it's the beginning or the end, but we want to try and get rid of it. Now, when we have an increase in the sequestration of these toxins, we call that our body burden. You see, we're exposed to many more toxins than we can process, and the difference becomes our body burden, what toxins are stored in our bodies. Now, there's a major issue because there's really no way to determine your body burden. I'm sorry, there is one way. It's called cremation. And so I don't really recommend it because you can only do it once, and then once you find out, there's really nothing you can do after that. But of course, we've seen, we've had cadavers, we've done cremations, and we've seen, high amounts of toxicity. We've captured vapors to do volatile organic studies, and we've captured heavy metals from cremated bodies. And we've seen that, year after year after year, our body burden seems to increase. The average body burden seems to increase. So it's a pretty scary concept. Now, there are things you can do. There's hair analysis, there's urine analysis. There's things you can do to see what you're excreting, or to do what they call a challenge to force you to excrete some toxins. And there are some mathematical things you can do to try and figure out or calculate what your body burden might be. The problem is some of us are better excreters than others. And so that calculation doesn't work in all of us. In fact, when they first started looking at autistic children to see if mercury was an issue, they couldn't find mercury in any of these kids because they were looking at excretion. And so they said, therefore, these kids don't have mercury. It wasn't until they understood the concept of challenging for the release of mercury that they found that these kids actually had very high levels of mercury. They were just poor excreters. They just didn't get rid of it very well. And so that's where things like active detoxification come in. How can we challenge the system to remove these toxins? Now, everybody's talking about a greener society. Everybody's talking about a green earth, a green neighborhood, a green city. And these are very huge concepts. And I believe in the use of solar panels and wind power and water power, and I believe in all these things to try and make a greener earth. The problem is most of these are in the purview of governments, of administrations, and it goes beyond what the average person can do. So when I talk about trying to make our planet a greener place, I say, why not start with yourself? Why not say, how can I take the toxins out of my body? How can I be a greener person, make a greener you? And so we're actually working on a documentary now called Clear, and the whole concept is, how can I be cleaner? How can I be clearer, and so therefore have a cleaner, healthier family, have a healthier, healthier offspring, and over time, generation by generation, have a lower body burden. So let's talk about the concept of decreasing our body burden. There are many, many things that are used in detoxification. If you look at some of the modalities, things like infrared saunas and colonics and the use of herbal diuretics, chlorella, herbal laxatives like senna, all these things, all these modalities, for the most part, have to do with the concept of wasting. How do we get things out of the body? We sweat them out, we urinate, we defecate. Anything that gets them out of our body, gets anything out of our body, will bring toxins along with it. And so it's really an interesting concept. It's a good concept. Using things like IR saunas certainly help, increasing sweat. So things that are normally excreted in sweat will be excreted more. The use of laxatives and diuretics, herbal laxatives and diuretics, certainly work, and they increase our tendency to go to the bathroom and remove toxins along with them. There are three issues associated with all of these modalities. The first issue is dehydration. All of these modalities can lead to dehydration. That's true of almost any type of detoxification. So if you're detoxing, drink water. Drink plenty of water. We recommend at least 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. Additionally, some of these, especially the use of laxative diuretics and sweating, can rob you of serum electrolytes as well. So you want to try and replace those electrolytes. And you pick your favorite sports drink or Pedialyte or anything like that to try and get some of those electrolytes back in your body as well. The second issue, and this is a little more dangerous, is the concept of dependency. Some of these products actually cause dependency. For example, the use of senna-based teas. It relaxes the peristaltic response, and so you tend to go to the bathroom more. It tends to act as a laxative. If you use it all the time, you can grow dependent on it, where when you go off it or don't use it, you wind up chronically constipated. Now, I like senna-based teas. I work with a company that actually manufactures a senna-based tea, but it's supposed to be used responsibly. 2-3 times a week is great. And the best way to use a product like that is to drink it just before you go to bed at night, and gravity is actually part of the equation. So you drink it just before you go to bed. You go to bed. In the morning when you wake up, gravity kicks in, and you have a moving experience. It really does work. But I've talked to people who use it all the time, not 2-3 times a week, but 2-3 times a day.
Wow.
And these people wind up growing dependent on it. When they don't use it, they wind up with chronic constipation. And there actually is a syndrome called distal bowel encopresis, which is really unique to the use of compounds like that, where it's chronic constipation followed by explosive diarrhea. It's just not a fun concept. And so I would tell people you can use those products, but use them responsibly. Okay? Now, besides dehydration and dependency, the other issue we see with the use of these sort of detox products is a concept known as healing crisis or dumping syndrome. And this is a little more ephemeral, so I'll try to explain it. You see, the body has sequestered all these toxins. They're hidden in the bone, in the fat, in the muscle, in the tissue. And now you start to waste things. All these things start to get wasted out of the body. What happens then is the tissues start to release those toxins and sequestration. Because it says, wow, I'm losing all this stuff. There's a change in the concentration in circulation, so we're going to start to release these toxins. And it can happen too fast. If it happens too fast, then all these toxins, which for the most part were safely sequestered, start to go back into circulation. And that can cause all sorts of issues. It can greatly reduce pH, so you end up with an acidic pH, which can cause all sorts of issues with bacterial infections, viral infections. Everything can proliferate. Yeast infections, systemic yeast infections, rashes, all sorts of things can happen. For the most part, it's not dangerous. These detox syndromes or healing crises or detox crises are not dangerous. They're just really, really, really uncomfortable. And in many cases, if you've ever been through a detox program, that your naturopathic doctor, your physician, is probably telling you this is normal. This is just what happens when you detox. And so understand that that's another issue that can occur with these modalities. Now, the newest concept in detoxification is more specific. It's the concept of chelation therapy. Now, understand what chelation is. Chelation is using some sort of compound that has an affinity for a toxin that you want to remove. It binds to the toxin, makes it more water-soluble, and it allows you to eliminate it through the urine. And just think about my lecture. What does that do? What does that mean? It's basically a synthetic form of transformation. It's exactly what the liver does. The liver transforms a toxin, makes it more water-soluble so you can eliminate it through the kidneys and the urine. Well, what chelation does is the same thing. It becomes the substrate that binds to the toxin, making it more water-soluble for easy removal. Now, there are a couple of major issues with classic chelation therapy. To illustrate it, I'll talk about the first most popular chelator, which was EDTA. EDTA really came into its own during World War II, when sailors were painting ships with lead paint, and Army guys were working in the motor pool with lead batteries. There was a lot of lead poisoning during World War II. They started using EDTA to try and remove the lead. Well, EDTA is a small compound with a -2 charge. Lead has a +2 charge. So when you gave them the EDTA, it would +2 and -2 capture the lead, become neutral, and be eliminated through the urine. Great concept. The problem is EDTA, like almost every other chelator, is charge specific. So it will take anything with a +2 charge. So it removes lead, but also removes calcium and magnesium, which are necessary for life. And so patients undergoing chelation with EDTA have to keep adding calcium and magnesium back into their bodies to make up for the difference. Now understand the concentration issue. Over time, the concentration of lead will decrease, the concentration of calcium and magnesium increase, and so you keep taking out the calcium and magnesium, you keep adding back in, and there are diminishing returns. And you wind up never getting rid of all of the heavy metal. You can't, because through Brownian motion, through basic concepts of biochemistry, the chelator is only going to take out the highest concentration compounds. And so because of its non-specificity, you'll never greatly remove or lower the amount of heavy metals in the system. And this is true of really every chelator. The other issue with many chelators is that they cause a lot of damage to the kidneys and the bladder. And they do this really for two reasons. The first is that just because it's bound to the toxin, it's bound on the outside of the chelator and is still available for activity. And so as the EDTA is dragging the lead through the kidneys or the bladder, that lead can cause damage on the way out. Additionally, large amounts of chelator is usually used. For example, EDTA, when it's given through IV, is dosed at as much as 3 grams at a time, and that's a huge amount of compound to start filtering through the kidneys and the bladder. And it can cause all sorts of damage to the kidneys and the bladder. In fact, patients who have kidney or bladder dysfunction are warned not to undergo classic chelation therapy. So all that being said, what can you do? Well, there are new concepts in chelation therapy, and the newest concept is the use of zeolites. See, zeolites are natural compounds. Just like other chelators, they carry a negative charge, but they're formed in volcanic eruptions. When a volcano erupts, the lava and the ash goes into salt water, and over thousands of years, layer upon layer, it forms these cage-like structures. These zeolites have a cage-like structure and a negative charge, and because of that, they can draw to themselves and trap within themselves positively charged compounds. So they're incredibly interesting compounds. The first chelator, the first zeolite, was discovered in the mid-1700s by a scientist who simply heated powdered rock, and water came out. And he couldn't understand where the water was coming from. The powder was completely desiccated. It was completely dried out. And yet when he heated it, water came out. So he called it zeolite, which means boiling rock. And where does the water come from? It comes from the cage. There's so much space inside that zeolite that it holds all sorts of things, including water. It holds a lot of water inside. And so many zeolites have been used for industrial purposes, and I'll go over just some concepts of the use of zeolites over the last really 800 years. There are 49 different naturally occurring zeolites. We divide them by the type of crystals that they form, their crystal structure. Different zeolites doing different things because of their crystal structure. The first family we call acular or needle-like zeolites, and I have a picture there of scolecite, which look at the crystals, they look like little pins. Mostly in the past, acular-type zeolites were used for building fibrous material. For example, asbestos is an acular or needle-like zeolite. And we know that when people breathe in asbestos, the little pins get stuck inside the lungs, and they cause asbestosis mesothelioma. So really, acular zeolites are not used often or really at all really in industry anymore. Another family of zeolites are equins, or grape-like zeolites, and my example there is chabazite. Equin zeolites are used for all sorts of things. They're used in kitty litter and deodorizers. If anyone's ever seen what they call a salt lamp, it's basically just a big piece of salt that has like a night light in it, and you plug it in, the light heats up the salt, and it's supposed to deodorize your room. Well, that's chabazite. As the heat works through the zeolite, it forces cationic exchange, and since a lot of odors carry a positive charge, it sucks up the odors in the room. So it's a really interesting product. These grape-like zeolites are also used in digestive formulas. For example, kaopectate utilizes a grape-like zeolite or equine zeolite to try and stabilize digestive function, capturing all sorts of toxins in the digestive tract and helping to stabilize pH. The last family of zeolites are called sheet-like zeolites. When they form crystals, they're very flat sheets, and when they break them down, they're very rounded edges to the crystals. And so they're considered to be completely safe and non-toxic. They're very easily to micronize. And the zeolite that has the most use historically for chelation and for traditional medicine is a sheet-like zeolite called clinoptilolite. In fact, clinoptilolite has been used for more than 800 years in traditional medicine. It's been used throughout India and parts of Asia like China, Russia, Croatia, even parts of Japan and Australia. There's whole communities in India that are geophasics, or clay eaters, and they eat clinoptilolite every single day as part of their diet. And they have incredible results from it: promotion of general health, reduction in acid reflux, etc. Clinoptilolite is also highly abundant. It's found pretty much everywhere. It's considered to be completely safe and non-toxic. And whereas classic chelation is only charge-specific, clinoptilolite has an incredibly high affinity for toxic metals and other environmental toxins, and really low affinity or no affinity for the healthy minerals. And I'll go over that concept in a few minutes. Now, there are some issues with naturally occurring clinoptilolite when we talk about its use in humans as a dietary supplement or adjunct to chelation. First, natural clinoptilolite tends to be really big. When you mine it, the powder is roughly 40 microns or larger. In fact, primarily it's 200 microns or larger. And so that's way too big to be absorbed into the bloodstream. The chelator actually acts only in the digestive tract in that case. And so any kind of clinoptilolite product in the past was primarily active in the digestive tract and not a systemic chelator or systemic detoxifier. Additionally, clinoptilolite from the mine site tends to be really dirty. And I'll explain that in a minute, but understand that what this zeolite does is it sucks up toxins and heavy metals. And so when you find it in its natural state, when you find it in nature, it's full of toxins and heavy metals. Now, I'm not saying it's dangerous. Remember, I told you that clinoptilolite is completely safe and non-toxic. But if the cage is already full of these high-affinity compounds, how much more benefit could it be to you? Now, certainly, historically, we find that it has benefit. But when we first started looking into it, we said if we could clean out that cage, if we could remove the stuff that's already inside it, we would greatly increase the surface area and therefore make for a much more effective product. And that's where our concept came in for the use of a product I'm going to discuss called natural cellular defense. Now, because of it's so full of environmental toxins, natural clinoptilolite has very little usable surface area. And I have this picture here of a zeolite mine site, of a clinoptilolite mine site. And you can see at the bottom there's 3 people standing by the mine site. So that shows you the how big this mine is.
Right.
This one mine site has over 300 million tons of clinoptilolite in it. So we have a lot of it. It's highly, highly abundant. But I'm showing you this picture for 2 reasons. First, to show you the abundance of the raw material. But secondly, understand how available it is to the environment. When air flows past this, when water flows over it, it becomes nature's filter. And it sucks up all these toxins, all these heavy metals, and they get trapped inside the zeolite cage in this mine site. And so when we mine it, we find all sorts of things in it. Now, as part of our process, when we clean out the zeolite, we capture what's coming off, because we want to know exactly what this mine site was exposed to. And sometimes we can tell right away what heavy metals there are, what volatile organic compounds there are, but sometimes we don't know what it is, so we send it out for further analysis. About 8 months ago, we conducted an analysis where we had some organics come off, and we sent it out for further testing, and it came back as diesel fuel exhaust.
Wow.
And so you have to understand that means that the actual mining equipment that's mining the clinoptilolite is giving off diesel fumes, which are being sucked up by the clinoptilolite, by the zeolite.
Right.
And so if you have another product out there, another zeolite that has not been activated, has not been cleaned out, it actually has a diesel fuel exhaust in there. Again, I'm not saying that's dangerous, but it's certainly something I wouldn't tolerate. I'd expect the product to be cleaner. And so this really leads to what we call our activation process. How do we make this natural clinoptilolite a much more effective detoxifying agent than we've ever seen before? And so the first step is what we call micronization. You see, we start with the raw clinoptilolite from the mine site, and it's a very rough powder. The smallest particles are probably about 40 microns. And then we undergo a process where it's ground over and over and over again, and then put through an air circulator and a centrifuge to change out the particles, but then grind it over and over and over again. A very, very labor-intensive process. And then we wind up with a powder that's smaller than 5 microns. Nothing is bigger than 5 microns from this first step. Now, you can see from the raw powder to the fine powder, that is such a fine powder that if you simply blew on it lightly, it would just go right into the air. I mean, we'd call it aerosolized. You know, so that's one of the reasons that we suspend it in water when we dose the product. If we put it into capsules or left it as a powder, it would be too able to be just dismissed or dispersed into the air. And so to try and stabilize it, we put it into liquid. So then the next step, David, do you have a question?
No. I'm just absorbing all this.
Okay, the next step is we add an ultra-purified water in a reaction vessel, and we start to slowly heat it. And certainly we don't hurt it at all. We use natural acids along with the heat process to begin the activation of the zeolite. Now, the first things to come off are the volatile organic compounds. We've seen benzene, dioxin, dichlorobenzene, formaldehyde, phthalates. We've seen a lot of things come off. And as you can see from the apparatus, we capture all of that so we can see exactly what's coming off of the zeolite. As you can see from this image, all this black stuff that's coming off, all of that's in the natural powder. And it comes off, it quickly oxidizes, and we remove it from solution. And so it's a way that we can drive off all of these things that are taking up space inside the zeolite cages. Now, in this time, when we remove calcium magnesium from the product, we reintroduce the calcium magnesium in what's known as oversaturation. We try to drive off everything else with an overabundance of calcium and magnesium. Now, let me ask you this, Rick. Yes.
With the success of, obviously with what you guys are doing with this product, and from what I've seen, it apparently works pretty well. Are there people out there who are coming out with Me Too products? Do you think they go through the same process?
No, they don't. In fact, that's what I want to point out is that nobody else does any sort of micronization or activation. There are some companies. There's a company in Germany that makes a product called Megamins, and they do a tribal mechanical activation. They basically shake up the product, and so the lighter particles come to the top, the heavier particles sink, and so they take the top particles. So they wind up with a much smaller compound, a much smaller product than most people have. It's about 5 microns. Our particles, when we're done this process, you'll see that we don't have anything more than 1 micron, and in fact now our average particle size is about 0.5 microns. So that means it's easily absorbed from the digestive tract into the bloodstream, and we don't see that with any other product. Additionally, we analyze all the competitive products that are out there, and all of their final products look like our starting material.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they've done nothing to it. It looks like it just came right out of the mine. And so it's kind of disturbing. And then some people, there's one product out there, and we've done the analysis on it and published the analysis. It was done third party. It's a product being sold in England under the name Spirit of Sunshine. And they actually do a 0.2 micron filtration to try and prove that they have such small particles that, that they're better than us. But a 0.2 micron filter takes out everything, even all the zeolite. And so they've actually wound up with what looks like their starting material of tap water. You know, they don't even use an ultra-purified water. They use a tap water to make their product. And we've actually analyzed the tap water in their lab, and their finished product looks just like their tap water. Now, I'm not saying that they're just putting the water into bottles. I think they do a process, but their use of filtration removes all of their finished goods, all of their product. So it's I guess you could call it homeopathic. If there's anything left in there, it's just undetectable. But certainly there's no zeolite in that product. And as I said, I can talk about this because all these products have been analyzed by third parties, and there is a website called liquidzeolite.org. It's liquidzeolite.org. It's a third-party website. I have nothing to do with that website, but they publish all of these findings, all of these analyses that are conducted on these competitive products. And so it's a really great site to compare the different zeolites that are available.
Got it.
Okay. So now, as we go to the next step, the first thing comes off of the volatile organic compounds. Then, in a much more difficult process, we want to remove all the metals. Now, remember that I told you that the heavy metals, mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, they love the zeolite, so they hold on to it very tightly. So we use different types of natural acids, things like acetic acid, which is in essence vinegar, and we use low heat over a long period of time to remove all those heavy metals over time. It takes a very long time. It takes a repeated effort. And the first step is we do this 5 times over 4 days. But then after filtration, we do it all over again. The last thing is an air-forced and vacuum filtration that removes all soluble toxins, neutralizes the solution, and we wind up with a particle size of around 1 micron. As I told you, as we've improved the process over time, our average particle size has decreased. So now, with the current products we're making, our average particle size is down to 0.5 microns, which means that every bit of the zeolite gets in. It actually gets into the bloodstream, circulates, and naturally chelates throughout the body. Now, here I've compared the natural cellular defense, which is our activated micronized zeolite, to other zeolite products. Now, first let me say that we were the first ones out there. We were the first suspended zeolite on the marketplace, and we had great results. We did some early clinicals that proved to be invaluable to our understanding of the product and the process for activation. People had great testimonials, great outlooks in using the product, and sales just took off. I mean, people everywhere started using the product. Now, of course, because of that, it actually promoted competition. You know how they say, imitation is the finest form of flattery? Well, I wasn't flattered because these are really just low-grade imitators in the worst sense of the word. I mean, these are people that, in essence, just grab the powder out of the zeolite mine and understand how cheap zeolite is. I mean, clinoptilate is only about $700 a ton. I mean, it's incredibly cheap to just go and buy this powder. It's the labor-intensive process, the quality control that we put on the product that makes it so expensive. And these people are simply taking the zeolite out of the mine. They're either throwing it in capsules or powders or just mixing it up in water and selling it as a zeolite product. Now, some other things that they're doing are they're mixing it with humic or fulvic acid. Now, I don't want to start a whole lecture on humic and fulvic acids and the pros and cons, but understand what they are. Humic acid is simply dead and decaying plant material. It's humus, like you'd see in a compost heap. And you have to ask yourself, what makes plants decay? Well, bacteria and fungus. And so humic and fulvic acid is a humic fraction, so it's found in humic acid. By definition, they contain bacteria and fungus. Now, certainly you can remove minerals from humic and fulvic acid. You can gamma radiate. You can do all sorts of things to try and limit the damage that can be done by bacteria and fungus. But by definition, it has to be in there. Now, the reason they add the humic and fulvic acid is because it forces the zeolite to stay in solution. You see, these full, large zeolite products tend to sink really quickly. And so they don't stay in a liquid. They sink right to the bottom. And the first competitors used glass bottles, so all you saw was this chunk of mud at the bottom of the product, at the bottom of the bottle. So by adding minerals from humic and fulvic acid, it surrounds the zeolite and it suspends it in solution. So it's a little bit of an illusion. They really do it to try and make the product look better. But what we found is when we compare natural cellular defense to the other products, first of all, we have a smaller product. It's less than or equal to 1 micron, and so it's absorbed into the bloodstream. With the other products, it's only active in the digestive tract if it's active at all. Of course, the natural cellular defense is free of toxins, heavy metals, volatile organic compounds. The other products contain heavy metals and VOCs. We have no bacterial growth. The others may have bacterial growth, but certainly the humic and fulvic acid has noticeable bacterial and fungal growth. In fact, one of the first competitive products to ever hit the market, the first thing that happened is it turned your teeth green when you took it. So this is a company that had no understanding of how zeolites work, of how to manufacture a zeolite product. They simply took zeolite and they mixed it in with humic acid. So it turned their teeth green, and then over several months they started hearing more and more people that were getting sick, and eventually 5 people were hospitalized with aflatoxicosis, which aflatoxins are a poison, a toxin that's created by the fungus, Aspergillus parasiticus and Aspergillus flavus. And they come usually from nuts or beans, different types of plants that grow this fungus, but they can cause liver damage. They can be fatal. If it's not treated right away, it can be fatal, very damaging to the liver. And so obviously this humic acid that was in the product had aflatoxins in it and caused aflatoxicosis in the patients that were using the product. And so it was incredibly dangerous. So I always say buyer beware. If you're going to buy from a company, make sure it's a reputable company with reputable quality control and quality assurance in place. Certainly they should have product liability insurance. They should be backed by sound science. So it's always buyer beware when you're talking about dietary supplements. And if you're looking at a company or looking at a product, don't simply compare by price because you really get what you pay for.
Right.
Right. All right, so again, let's look at the surface area. Because we clean out the zeolite and we micronize it, we have the highest surface area ratio of any zeolite product that's ever been created. In fact, 1 gram of the activated zeolite, which is about 100 drops of the product, has 90 square feet of surface area. That's a huge amount of surface area. So if you talk about someone taking the detox dose, which is 30 drops a day, it's about 1/3 of that. So think about, even if it's just about 30 square feet, I mean, imagine how many atoms of mercury can fit on 30 square feet. I mean, it's a huge amount, which is why a very little bit of the product seems to go such a long way, and people have such huge effects from it. Of course, the other products have very limited surface areas. And lastly, we've conducted 14 clinical studies. We have 5 more underway. We have 3 more under IRB approval, so internal review board approval. So it is our goal to constantly keep doing clinical research and eventually publish all of our findings. Other zeolite products have very limited clinical studies. Almost all of them are in animals over the last 30 years. And in humic and fulvic acid, there's no clinical research whatsoever. So understand that. Now we'll go back to how this thing actually works. This is an illustration of a clinoptilolite cage. It's a repeating crystal structure of 10-sided and 8-sided rings. You have a 10-sided ring followed by an 8-sided ring in all directions. So we have a 10-sided ring, an 8-sided ring, followed by a 10-sided ring, 8-sided ring. The 10-sided ring is about 7.5 angstroms by 4.2 angstroms, and the smaller 8-sided ring is 4.2 by 4.2 angstroms. So that tells you basically the size of the pores and what can and cannot fit inside the zeolite. I want to point out a couple of things. First, this one picture is not 1 cage of zeolite. If you measure that across, that's only about 1 nanometer. Okay, so when I talk about a 1 micron cage, that would be about 1 billion of the picture that you're looking at. Okay, 1,000 across, 1,000 down, and 1,000 deep. Okay, so that tells you how many holes you could see in a 1 micron cage. Huge amount of surface area. I simply do this so you can see what a repeating crystal structure looks like. Additionally, it has a huge negative charge. When we talk about EDTA having charge of -2, attracting 1 atom of lead with a charge of +2, we can look at the average 1 micron zeolite cage of having a net negative charge of around -15,000. So it's a huge net negative charge. It can absorb a lot of positively charged material. and then I'll talk about affinity in a few minutes. The next thing I want to talk about is some of our competitors that have come out lately have described our activation process saying that we destroy the zeolite. We break it down and destroy the zeolite in our process. Well, understand how impossible that is. The zeolite, for all practical purposes, is virtually indestructible. It takes heat greater than 900 degrees, more than 5 hours, to break the crystal structure of a zeolite. It's one of the toughest substances on the planet. Now, when we micronize it, all we're doing is making smaller cages. My best example of this is consider a diamond. I'm sure there are plenty of people listening tonight that know what diamonds are. Well, diamonds, hardest substance on the planet, repeating crystal structure of carbon, you can crush a diamond, and you have diamond powder. But that diamond powder are still diamonds. They have the same crystal structure and the same properties as a diamond they came from. And so that's what we're doing with the zeolite. We're crushing it down, making smaller cages, but they're still zeolite cages. They're just smaller. And so we don't destroy the zeolite. We don't break the bonds of the zeolite. It's simply smaller so it's better absorbed into the system. Okay? And then some people accuse us of using harsh chemicals to treat the zeolite. We use low temperature and all natural acids to function in cationic exchange to try and clean out the zeolite. So nothing is, everything's organic, everything's natural in our process, and it certainly doesn't hurt the zeolite. It simply activates it to be its most active and most effective. Now, let's talk about the concept of why the zeolite tends to like the bad stuff and not the good stuff. What really differentiates it from other chelators? Now, as I said before, all chelators, DMPH and DMSA and EDTA, all these chelators are charge specific, and so they take the good out with the bad. The zeolite tends to like smaller, higher charge metals. The smaller the metal and the higher the charge, the greater the affinity for the zeolite. Let me start by talking about the charge. Remember I told you that it had a huge net negative charge, minus 15,000. Well, the higher the positive charge on the cation, on the atom, the greater it's going to stick to the high negative charge of the zeolite. My favorite example here is a refrigerator magnet. We all have refrigerator magnets, and you all have that one weak magnet you put in the refrigerator and it slides down the fridge. It won't even hold one piece of paper, you know? You have to put helper magnets around it to keep it up, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that's like a weak charge trying to hold onto the zeolite cage. Then you have that one super magnet your son brought home from the science fair. It hits the refrigerator and you hear it bang. You can't move it, you can't budge it, you try to pry it off with a knife. Well, that's like a high charge attaching to the zeolite cage. So the higher the positive charge of the zeolite, the higher the positive charge of the atom, the greater it's going to stick to the zeolite. Additionally, the smaller the atom, the greater affinity it has, or the greater amounts of space it will take up inside the zeolite. It can get into the deepest pores and have more points of coordination. In this image, I looked at something like potassium and calcium being larger than mercury. And you can see that the potassium barely touches the walls of the cage of the zeolite, and so to the calcium. When the mercury comes in, it can fit more snugly, it has more points of coordination, and it actually displaces the larger atoms, things like the calcium. So the smaller the atom, the more it displaces the larger atoms, the counterions. Now, it so happens that all the things that are good for us tend to be larger with lower charges, and all the things that are bad for us tend to be smaller with higher charges. Now, just for everyone's edification, when I talk about size, I'm talking about van der Waals radii. These are active sizes in solution. Okay, because some people would say, well, I look at the periodic table and you're wrong about these sizes. Understand the sizes are relative to cations in solution, what we call van der Waals radii. And so if we look at the affinity of the zeolite, it tends to love mercury and lead first. In some studies, we see the lead is high affinity and some the mercury, but certainly mercury and lead are the highest affinity ions. After that, an order of magnitude less, we have, and 3 orders of magnitude less, we have things like iron and nickel. And so really the top most toxic heavy metals have the highest affinity for the zeolite, for the clinoptilolite. And we've seen that in study after study. Now, concentration can play a part in affinity. For example, iron is very low on the affinity scale by the zeolite. And so, for example, a regular person who has regular iron levels, you won't become anemic. The zeolite is not going to pull out iron. But we've seen people who have hemochromatosis, which is an iron overload, usually treated by phlebotomy. They have to give blood every 8 to 12 weeks to lower their iron stores, where they can suffer liver damage or other issues. Well, we've seen that when these patients take the zeolite, it does remove the iron, because as concentration increases, it can remove the excess iron from solution without causing anemia. So concentration does play a role, and copper is, when we see hypercupremia, it'll pull out the copper. Although it doesn't really like copper when you're facing mercury and lead and other things, it likes them much more than the copper. Okay, but we have really studied it and have a great understanding for the way it pulls out these heavy metals. Now, just because it doesn't like the lighter, bigger, lower charged metals doesn't mean they don't go inside. They'll migrate into the zeolite cage, but they don't like it there, and the zeolite doesn't like them there. They're lower affinity. So when higher affinity atoms come in, they will exchange for the lower affinity atoms. This process is known as cation exchange. And I have a little illustration here where I'll show you that basically here we can see that the lead exchanges for the potassium, mercury exchanges for calcium, we have ammonium exchanging for sodium, arsenic exchanging for calcium, and this process will occur over and over and over again until the highest affinity metals are trapped inside the zeolite, a net neutral charge is attained, and then the zeolite simply gets excreted through the kidneys and bladder like any other chelator. This process takes, on average, 3 to 5 hours. So depending on your physical activity, your diet, and how many times you go to the bathroom.
And this doesn't place any burden on the kidneys or the liver, does it?
None at all. In fact, that's a really good question. Because first of all, the two issues that you have with chelators that cause damage to the kidneys, the first issue is that the toxin is on the outside of the chelator and so still available for reactivity. For the zeolite, for the most part, the toxins are trapped inside. And once they're inside the zeolite, for all practical purposes, they're out of solution. They're not there anymore. And this is, to put an example to this, remember that the first zeolite was found because it was powdered rock, completely dry, and when he heated it, water came out. That water was trapped inside and completely unreactive. It didn't evaporate. It would never evaporate because it's trapped inside the zeolite. It's not until it's heated to very high temperatures that you could drive the water off. So the same as with these ions, these heavy metals. They're trapped inside the zeolite and they don't come out even when you pass it through the bladder and the kidneys. Additionally, the other problem with these chelators is they use a lot. They use like 3 grams of EDTA during a regular session. Well, that starts to crystallize and can build up in the kidneys. The zeolite, you're using very low amounts. Even if you're using 10 drops at a time or 15 drops at a time, you're getting maybe 150 milligrams of the zeolite total at a time. So they're incredibly small amounts when you compare it to something like 3 grams of EDTA. And so it's completely safe and non-toxic. It's safe even for people with kidney disease or kidney dysfunction or bladder dysfunction.
Great.
Now, besides heavy metals, the zeolite does bind to certain other toxins, things like volatile organic compounds. Now, I used to deny this all the time. In fact, people would come up to me and say, does it remove these pesticides or herbicides or other things? And I would say, no, they're way too big to fit inside the zeolite, so therefore it can't remove it. Meanwhile, we would get raw zeolite from the mine, and it would be full of this stuff. It would be full of benzene and dioxin and dichlorobenzene, and it didn't make sense to me. So I started having my researchers look into it and say, what is a mechanism by which the zeolite can trap these larger compounds? And we found this paper that was published in 1996 in the journal Active Crystallography. And if you look at this image, the compounds on each side represent a zeolite cage. So there's 2 zeolite cages there. Between them, we see a molecule of dichlorobenzene. It's a benzene ring with 2 chlorines attached, dichlorobenzene. We see one in the middle and one across the top. Dichlorobenzene is a refrigerant breakdown product. It's very prevalent in the environment and highly carcinogenic. So it is cancer-causing. Now, one of the properties of it is that the molecule is flat. It's because of that benzene ring. It gives the molecule a flat structure. Because it's flat, it can actually lay across the outside of the zeolite cage. When it does so, it starts to share electrons with the zeolite cage. If you look at that picture, you'll see a dotted line around the circle. Well, that dotted line represents 3 extra electrons shared among the 6 carbon atoms. That's what allows these benzene rings to be flat. Well, when it lays across the zeolite, those electrons become shared in the metallic bonds of the zeolite. When that happens, the dichlorobenzene takes on a slight positive charge, and it draws another zeolite cage to the other side of it, and it makes a toxic sandwich. It's a very elegant organic mechanism. It works in a variety of different volatile organic compounds, and it works very well, as can be evidenced by the fact that we find a bunch of these compounds in natural deposits of zeolite, in natural deposits of clinoptilolite. Now, here's the question. The mechanism only occurs because of the structure that these volatile organic compounds have in common. Is there anything good for us that has that structure? And the answer is no. That flat structure is what makes them so dangerous. They can slide into our cell membranes through our phospholipid membranes. They can slide into the turns of our DNA. It's called intercalation. They can intercalate into the DNA and cause cancer. It's that flat structure that makes them so dangerous, and it's also that flat structure that makes them so able to be trapped by the zeolite. I think that's amazing.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, the thing that makes it so toxic is what allows it to be trapped. So we have done clinical research. We've looked at 60 different volatile organic compounds. We found very high affinity among things like formaldehyde, phthalates, dioxin, dioxane, benzene derivatives, toluene. Just fantastic results. Now, as I said, we've done 14 clinical studies. Most of the clinical studies were in increased excretion of heavy metals. We found that on average, healthy individuals increased their excretion rates by about 700%. So it's 7 times the amount of heavy metals that would normally excrete. They excrete while using the natural cellular defense. For toxic individuals, we've seen them excrete as much as 15 to 17 times the amount of heavy metals that would normally excrete. And we conducted a study in that case in West Virginia coal miners. Now these individuals, it was a study of 50 coal miners, 40 using the active and 10 using the placebo. And all the people in the active saw anywhere from a 12 to 15 to 17-fold increase in heavy metal excretion. In this case, we also asked them questions about how they felt when they took the product, if they felt that it was benefiting them. And in their own words, across the board, they all said that it made them feel like they had more energy, they were sleeping better at night, they had better visual acuity, and better cognitive function. So they all said that they greatly improved using the zeolite. There was no placebo effect. In fact, all 10 patients in the placebo told me that my product made them worse, which I thought was hilarious.
Okay, how do you explain that? I mean, if all it does is remove toxins, how do you explain the sleep and the energy?
Well, the energy, I talk about how a healthier body simply fixes itself. As metabolic processes improve, you wind up with more ATP, you wind up with higher amounts of zinc finger proteins, you heal better. As you have more energy during the day, you tend to sleep better at night. Everything starts to work better when the body works better. Now, when it comes to mental function and visual acuity, we have separate mechanisms for that. For cognitive function, we believe that a lot of toxins inhibit neurologic function because they tend to reside on or around the nerves or in the brain. As we remove those metals, metalloenzymes work better, nerve signaling works better, and you start to improve in cognitive function. Eyesight is a little different. One of the factors that decreases vision over years is a downregulation of glutathione production in the liver. Glutathione is the necessary antioxidant for eye health, and it's reduced in function by a toxic liver. So as we start to take the pressure off the liver by detoxing the body, we believe that the liver upregulates glutathione peroxidase, and you wind up with more glutathione in circulation, and so you wind up with better eyesight.
Wow.
Now, again, these are all proposed mechanisms. All I can tell you is that the product's primary action is taking things out of the body that don't belong there. You remove these toxins, and a cleaner, healthier body starts to fix itself. So when you start reading these outrageous testimonials about how people cured this disease or that disease, or, I'll tell you a true story. I don't want to freak people out, but I was in Maui, and a man walked up on stage when I was talking about the natural cellular defense, and he said, literally, he said, I was blind, and now I can see.
Really?
I had people, they thought I was in a revival meeting, and they were starting to walk out. And I said, stop. Let's talk about this. Well, it winds up the guy was diabetic. He was a brittle diabetic, 4 injections a day of insulin. He had beginning stages of diabetic retinopathy, which is the leading cause of adult blindness in the United States. And he started using the NCD. He started taking care of himself, eating better. He got his diabetes under control, and his retinopathy improved. Now, certainly, I believe the natural cellular defense aided him because it made a healthier body that was able to heal more effectively. But certainly it didn't cure blindness. And so I do warn people about being overzealous in their testimonials, but by the same token, I feel that everybody can benefit from the product. A cleaner, healthier body fixes itself.
Absolutely. Now, did you remember to take an offering when that happened?
No. Well, there were so many physicians there, they were actually offended by the testimonials. And so I quickly got right back to the clinical research and started saying what we found in clinical studies. Now, okay, just to wrap this up, I want to talk about dosing, because a lot of people ask, is there a safe level, an unsafe level? The fact of the matter is the product is completely safe and non-toxic. You can take whole bottles of it. It's not going to hurt you. But it is passively absorbed. And so if you take too much at one time, you're going to get less absorbed into the bloodstream, and more will stay in the digestive tract. So I really tell people not to exceed 15 drops at a time. If they take more than that, it's not dangerous, but it could be wasteful. And I like people to try and get the best bang for their buck. So we do recommend that everyone start on a detox dose, 10 drops 3 times a day. 10 drops 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's going to be in circulation throughout the day. It's going to quickly start to remove all the toxins in circulation. Then you can drop to the maintenance dose, 3 to 5 drops 3 times a day. And every 6 to 12 months, repeat the detox dose. But if you're highly toxic, if you live in an inner city, if you work in a factory, if you know that you've been exposed to these things, then you can always take higher doses. And when I talk about the maximum effective dose, I would recommend 15 drops 4 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime, for a 60-drop daily dose.
Wow, okay. That's helpful.
Okay. So, and then, as I said before, one of the biggest things that works against us is the testimonial, that people are out there saying how incredible this product is. And like I said, I don't believe in panaceas. I don't believe that there's one product that does everything. There's going to be different products that benefit different people. But certainly, as a start, this is the best detox product that's ever been created. And by cleaning out your body first, it's going to make everything work better. And I'll just give one more example before I take questions. Years ago, farmers have been using zeolites for animal feed for more than 30 years. And several years ago, they were concerned that they might be depleting the animals of some of the healthy serum electrolytes and healthy nutrition. So they did a huge study with ruminants, goats, cows, and sheep. All the animals got the same healthful diet. Half got the zeolite and half didn't. What they found is all the animals that were ingesting the zeolite had higher nutritional status than the ones that didn't, which meant not only did the zeolite not remove the healthy ions, the healthy minerals, but it allowed them to get better uptake from the food they were eating. And it's a very simple explanation. These toxins and these heavy metals compete for absorption. They compete for utilization by the body. When we start to remove them, the body can better utilize the nutrition it's getting. So not only is your food going to be better, you're going to get more value from your food, but over time you're going to get more value from other supplements you're taking. So when you take the natural cellular defense, it starts making everything else work better.
That's amazing. So it works in animals too, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a whole brochure on zeolite and pets. There's a website, zeoliteforums.com. It's all about veterinarians using the natural cellular defense in pets.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Well, I did talk for a way long time, and I hope I didn't bore everybody. Well, I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any questions.
Sure. I have a question.
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sure, Dr. Marvin, go ahead.
Okay. I have several questions. One, do you have any evidence and promotion that this helps atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease?
We haven't done that yet. And one of the findings of classic chelation therapy is that regardless of whether or not it pulls out heavy metals, it does exchange calcium in atheromas and calcified plaques. And so it aids in reduction of atheromas and aids in long-term outlook for cardiac patients. We haven't done that yet. Specifically, we looked at the excretion of heavy metals. But we are recruiting a study right now where we're going to do ultra-fast CT, looking at atheromas, and we're measuring blood levels of things like C-reactive protein to see if we have an effect on that as well.
I see. The other question is, when you take the 15 drops, do you put it in water or just put it in your mouth, or how do you take it?
That's a great question. When we did the coal miner study, we wanted to look at some sort of pharmacokinetics, but we didn't really want to do a pharmacokinetic study. So what we did was we told them to take the product any way they wanted. Put it right in your mouth, put it in water, put it in beverages, put it in food. Take it any way you want, but be consistent in the way you take it and tell us how you took it. And so people, they took it every which way. They put it in food. I mean, one guy every night put it in a scotch. You know, everyone had their way of doing it. But it didn't matter across the board. It didn't matter how they took the product. They got, as long as it got in the body, it did the same thing in everybody. So the fact is that the taste is certainly not repulsive in any way. It really doesn't taste like anything. I think the easiest thing is you carry the bottle around, you squirt it in your mouth. But if you choose to put in your food or in your drink, it's going to be just as beneficial.
My third question is, in a pregnant woman, just newly pregnant, would you recommend during pregnancy they take this? Because I read a pediatric article that said that from 35 to 50% of the women in New York City that have lived there over 10 years have toxic levels of different chemicals in their blood. In fact, 35 to 50% of these people qualified for a toxic substance, the breast milk. And I
discussed that previously, and absolutely, I would say that a pregnant or nursing mother, it's incumbent upon them to do something to detoxify to try and reduce the burden to their unborn infant and to their new infant. It's completely safe and non-toxic. It's certainly beneficial for the mother. We hear stories all the time that show the necessity for this. In fact, I mentioned that my partner, Dr. Stuart Lonke, is a pulmonologist in Los Angeles, and he had a partner that had a patient. It was a woman that had a normal pregnancy, normal childbirth. Then her and her husband moved to the suburbs of Los Angeles, and she planted a little vegetable garden for herself with her and her new baby, and they were thrilled. Well, over the next 3 years, she had 4 miscarriages. It was horrible. She couldn't get pregnant again. When she got pregnant, it was horrible. And they couldn't understand because she had a normal pregnancy the first time. She was fine. Eventually, she was diagnosed with lead poisoning. And it wound up that she was getting the lead from the vegetables she was growing in her own backyard. That area had once been a factory and where they built her house. And because it was zoned residential, there was no necessity to do soil testing. And so what I do recommend, anybody that wants to plant their own garden, it's $50 to $100 to do a soil test. Test the soil and make sure you're not going to poison yourself with your own vegetables. When she did chelate, when she got rid of the lead, within 2 years she was pregnant and had a normal pregnancy.
Wouldn't it be better if as soon as the woman was pregnant, she started taking this product so that by the time the baby was born, the baby and she both should be in better state?
Yeah, I would absolutely recommend that. Now, of course, we haven't done studies yet in pregnant nursing mothers. We know the product's safe because we have plenty of information, mostly from animal studies, about its lack of teratogenic problems. And so we know there's not going to be any issues. But over time, I would love to do some studies in pregnant nursing mothers.
I have just one other question. I want to say first that this has been very impressive to me because I've dealt a lot with antioxidants and detoxification, and I know I've got tons of statistics on how bad it is in the United States. And, you can't get away from it because it's in your water, it's everywhere. Wow. And what I would like to know is, could I get some literature on this?
I can make anything available to you. Certainly my book is available, Invisible Killers, which gives a lot of this information. We have the abstracts for all the studies we presented. I mean, I would be happy to provide anything to anybody out there. You can certainly go to our website, invisiblekillers.com, and I do make myself available as well. My email is Rik, which is R-I-K, at nutrapharma.com, N-U-T-R-A-P-H-A-R-M-A.
Wow.
Well, I understand this, David, that almost everything they would ask for is simply a cut and paste, and so if they ask for some of this information, my assistant can send it out from my email. So I didn't just overburden myself.
Okay. I was surprised. I was surprised you gave your email out, Rik.
Because anyone can go to my website and get my email, so it's pretty available.
Right. But knowing how busy you are,
the only secret you have is my cell phone number. So
I have one other question. How do you pronounce your product here?
Natural Cellular Defense.
No, the one up above. W-A-I-O-R-A.
Oh, Wayor is the company that distributes it.
Okay.
Wayor is a Polynesian word. It means health and longevity.
Okay.
I'm all for that.
It's not my company, but it took me a while to learn how to say that and what it meant.
I don't want to hog all the time, so maybe someone else has a question.
Yes. First of all, I just want to say, Rik, thank you so much for making such a complex scientific information, breaking it down and making it easy for us to understand. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I teach college, and I take it personal when people fall asleep on me, so I try to make it interesting and simple.
I hear you on that one. I teach in college, too. Okay. First of all, Sherry, can you transfer it to my slide real quick, and then we'll put it back?
Yes.
Real quick, folks, just like we kind of alluded to it, I can tell you right now that Rik is really, really busy a lot of the times. You probably get information from his secretary. Now, we have, like we mentioned at the beginning of the call, that we do have people who are familiar with the. Let me get this thing off. Okay, who are familiar with the product, who have been working with it for a while. Now we've already spoken with them. They are available to guide you through. So if you have any questions, you want to talk to someone directly, Mark and Dee Skipper will be available to help you do that. Now, the way you can contact them, you go to the homepage of our website, and just below the registration button, it says there's a line saying if you would like to know more. What does it say, Sherry?
Oh, I think it just says click here for information on zeolite.
Click here for information on zeolite, and then Dee or Mark will be there to answer your questions about it and help you get the product. Now, as Rik alluded to during the presentation, there are copycats all over the place who are kind of coasting on the success of this company, and they're going to come out with cheaper copycat products. You want to get the best. You want to get the most efficient. So don't be fooled by cheaper prices. Dee, are you on the line?
It looks like she is off, but it looks like Mark is on. So, Mark, I'm going to try to unmute you if you are there. Mark, are you there?
Okay. Well, are they there?
Are you there, Mark? It doesn't look like it, David.
Okay, great. All right, let's just get on with the questions then. Okay. You can go to our website, like we said, and you can click on it, and they'll guide you through. Okay. Sherry, you want to go ahead and ask your first question and transfer the screen to Rik's slide.
Okay. Yes. Let's see. Actually, one thing, Rik, I wanted to tell you is that there was actually a science class watching tonight, watching the webinar. I think that's pretty cool.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's neat. Okay, a couple of questions. I'll kind of put them together. Does it have a shelf life? And does it interact with other drugs? And then somebody had purchased some of the Wyora Natural Cellular Defense, and they said it was clear when they first got it, and then it turned dark. So just about it turning dark, shelf life, and how it interacts with drugs.
First of all, I turned off my thing here, so you're trying to give it back to me.
Oh, should I just give it back to David?
Wait, here, let me just figure out how to get this back.
Should have warned you.
Yeah, we should have. Sorry about that. We can just transfer it back to my screen. That's fine.
No, I got it. I'm on there. Let's see. Okay. Clean, and I'm there. Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Okay, shelf life. We do provide 2-year dating on it. The way it works in the dietary supplement industry is when you first launch a new product, you're required to do something called accelerated stability trials. Basically, you take the product in its final form, it's going to be marketed, and you put it into an oven at high temperature and high humidity, and you test it every couple of weeks. If it survives 3 months under those strenuous conditions and is exactly the same product, it passes all quality control, you can put 2-year dating on the product. So that's called accelerated stability. And so we gave it 2-year dating, which is standard for the industry. Then as the product ages naturally on the shelf, you can continue to do stability trials over years. So we've had product now that's going on 4 years old, it's shelf stable, and is completely perfect. So even though we put 2-year dating on the product, it's probably going to be good indefinitely. It is packaged in a sterile environment, so when the product is first bottled, it's completely sterile as long as it's sealed, and so it should last like that forever. Then you asked about changing color. Understand this, that the manufacturing process, the activation process, really continues to evolve. We keep making it better and better and better. When we were making the product a few years ago, we didn't do as many iterations of the activation as we do today, and we had one batch of natural cellular defense that had iron in it. Now, of course, we didn't know it had iron in it. When we packaged the product, it was perfect. But what happens over time as different ions exchange into and out of the zeolite, some of the iron that was trapped inside migrated out of solution, and it oxidized, in essence rusted, and it turned the product brown. Now, how much iron was in it? The average bottle had 0.75 micrograms of iron in it, so less than 1 microgram of iron. I joke that you could pass a steakhouse and breathe more iron. So there was very little, but it was enough to change the color, taste, and smell of the product. There was nothing wrong with it. In fact, people that returned that product, I used in clinical research. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. But there were perceived aesthetic issues. And so what we did was we increased the iterations of our activation process to make sure we got rid of the last of any of those ions or any of the iron that was trapped inside. And so now we have a completely stable product, a completely uniform product. It's always going to be the same color, taste, smell. There'll be no changes even over time.
Great.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn?
Yes. Oh, did you mention, though, about if it interacts with any drugs?
Okay, that's a great question. Now, understand this, that I'm talking about detoxification, I'm talking about dietary supplements, but my training and most of my career has been in drug discovery. I worked on cancer drugs early in my career. Now my drugs are primarily for the treatment of multiple sclerosis and adrenal neuropathy, and I also work on a drug for HIV, a fusion inhibitor. And people can visit nutrapharma.com for more information on our drug pipeline. So I'm well versed in how drugs are designed and why they're designed the way they are. And understand this, that because we know how the body treats positively charged compounds, most drugs don't carry a positive charge. Most drugs are made to be neutral or negatively charged. And so because of that, there's very little to no interaction between the natural cellular defense zeolite and any medications. Understand that the zeolite is incredibly passive in its mechanism. It simply floats around the body, and whenever it comes into contact with something for which it has an affinity, it migrates into the zeolite or adsorbs to the surface of the zeolite, and that's it. There's no chemical mechanism of action. People are concerned if they have stents or if they have pacemakers or hip transplants or breast implants. There's really no interaction whatsoever. So it's not going to, rip metals out of your hip transplant. It just doesn't do that. It's incredibly passive. And because of it, that's why it detoxes really very slow, very steady, and you don't even have to worry about those detox syndromes or dumping because it's so consistent and steady and slow. That being the case, there are some medications that I would be concerned about. And these would be medications that would contain heavy metals, usually on purpose. For example, the chemotherapies, cisplatin and carboplatin, both contain platinum. Platinum is a small, highly charged metal, and there is a risk that if you take the NCD when you're being treated with one of those drugs, the product will pull out the platinum and inactivate the drug. And so our recommendation is if you're being treated with one of those drugs, you would discontinue use of the product for a day or two before to a day or two after being treated.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay.
Does NCD cross the blood-brain barrier?
I don't know. I proposed a study years ago, a rat model to prove whether or not it crossed the blood-brain barrier, and I was denied doing the study because animal rights activists protested the study. So it was very annoying. I don't want to go into it, but doing drug research, we're required by law to do animal studies. I mean, the FDA requires us to do rat studies. And in that phone call, people said, how can you hurt a poor rat? Why would you hurt a poor rat? Why don't you use prisoners instead of rats?
You're kidding.
No. So I couldn't get into it, and at the time, the people I was working with basically forbid me to do the rat study. So I never got to do the study. Now, I I believe that it does cross the blood-brain barrier, at least in people with neurologic syndromes, because people with neurologic syndromes tend to have a very leaky blood-brain barrier. But the real point is that I don't think it's even necessary to cross the blood-brain barrier because all of these toxins cross the blood-brain barrier. And as you're removing toxins that are in circulation, heavy metals and toxins in circulation, you'll create a concentration gradient, basically a vacuum in the system, and the brain is going to start to deposit those toxins and heavy metals back into the bloodstream and back into the lymph. And so whether or not it gets in the blood-brain barrier is probably a moot point. I think all these things will come into circulation regardless.
So even the heavy metals and toxins that are attached to the nerves in the brain, they will eventually leak out if there's a gradient?
Absolutely. The body wants to, in fact, this is where dumping syndromes come in. The body wants to release those toxins, but because of the concentration in circulation, it can't. So that means Le Chatelier's principle of chemistry, once equilibrium shifts in one direction, the body tries to correct that. So once you start to remove all these toxins that are circulating, you're going to release those toxins from sequestration.
Got it. Got it. I have MGUS. Tell me what you feel is the best course of action. Well, folks, that is a medical question you're asking, and I don't think we do that. What is MGUS anyway? Do you know what that means, Rik?
Well, MG, we usually say myasthenia gravis, but I've never heard it referred to as MGUS. So
yeah, that's what I thought too. Anyway, yeah, folks, we do. Sherry, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? We do not give medical advice on this call. Sorry.
And I do have, I work with a lot of multiple sclerosis patients with my pharmaceutical company, with Nutripharma, and we do have nutritional protocols for people with disease and dysfunction. But again, because we're talking really about detoxification and a dietary supplement, we can't make any claim as the treatment or prevention of any symptom or disease. So if people do have more of a specific question where I can talk about adjunctive therapy, then I'd be happy to.
Right.
Rik, you mentioned not cooking with Teflon cookware, and this person said they'd also heard that stainless steel is toxic too, and they're just wondering if you have a recommendation of what type of cookware people should use.
Well, I still have Teflon cookware, and I even have chromium cookware, but it's chromium +3, so it's not chromium, it's not hexavalent chromium. But the biggest issue with Teflon is what utensils you use with it. If you're using utensils like that don't scratch the surface, that's smooth, then you're going to have less likely have anything that comes into contact with the food. Less Teflon comes into the food, and so you're better served. But I haven't really looked into this question of what the best cookware would be. I have these healthy gourmet chromium pots that I love. They seem to work with just a little bit of water. You don't even have to use oil or butter with them. So they seem to be naturally nonstick as long as you have any kind of liquid in them. So I love those, and I think they've served me pretty well over the last few years.
Coal-fired power plants, an important source of mercury pollution.
That is true. That's actually in my book. We talk about coal power plants being mercury and lead. So certainly there's a lot of toxins that come from coal fires. And we saw this with the coal miners too. People working in and around coal, even breathing in coal dust. And so yes, it's a huge source of mercury contamination: lead, cadmium, arsenic, tin, bismuth, aluminum, and antimony.
The foot detox pads such as Kinokis of any value in detoxing?
I don't believe so. We had this argument because the first time you saw anything like this were the foot baths, and they started in Asia and they made their way across the sea and across the United States. And just as they were getting popular in the United States, the Hong Kong government outlawed them and closed down all these clinics, these spas that were offering detox foot baths. And in essence, if you've never seen one of these, it's basically a vibrating kind of ultrasonic foot bath. You put warm water in there, and then the practitioner will add like teaspoons of certain salts and certain minerals to the water, and then over about a half hour or 45 minutes, the water darkens, it turns really dark, and then it bubbles, and sometimes you'll see things swimming around in there, and they'll tell you that's the toxins coming out of your body, and those are parasites that came out of your body. And I said, listen, my feet aren't very sensitive, but I would have felt a worm burrowing out of my foot, you know? I certainly would have felt that. And so the reason the Hong Kong government shut them all down is because it was fraudulent. In essence, the salts that were adding to solution were mineral salts, and just like I told you, when the iron came out of the zeolite, it turned the solution brown when it oxidized. That's what happens to metals in solution. So the metals in there darkened and turned black, and then in some cases they add like small, like brine shrimp eggs, what we used to call sea monkeys as kids, and so you have little things swimming around in there. And and I don't blame the practitioners, because practitioners were simply taught from the company. But their whole process was fraudulent in trying to convince you that you were detoxing through your feet. Your feet are just not that good at detoxing. The foot pads that I've seen are very similar in nature. They have they have mineral salts inside the foot pad, and when you sweat into the mineral salts, they tend to darken. There's also herbal compounds in there. They put like lavender or chamomile, and they do the same thing. When they get wet, they darken. And so the question is, how come you darken the first night and then you get less and less on successive nights? Well, you sweat less over time. You're sweating a lot your first night, but then your feet are drying out. And so you sweat less and less and less, so the pads are less and less dark. And then when you do it a month or two later, your feet are all sweaty again, and it starts all over. And so that's the basic mechanism of those products. And there's been no clinical evidence whatsoever that any of them, remove toxins or heavy metals from the body.
Okay. Hey, Rick, somebody was wondering about if the NCD takes out the bad stuff out of your body, once it's got all that out, then does it start grabbing the good stuff?
That's a great question. And we've been studying patients now for more than 3 years that are using high doses of the product, and we're looking at their serum electrolyte levels, just the easiest thing to monitor, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, zinc, iron, etc. And our contention is this, if you're using a lot of this over a long period of time, eventually don't you get rid of all these toxins, and then the zeolite will pull out the good stuff. And so far, even with 3 years of data, we're seeing that just isn't happening. Their serum electrolyte levels are staying the same. They're staying within par values, and there's really nothing going on except the removal of toxins and heavy metals. And so I would tell you this. We live in a toxic world. You will never get rid of all the toxins in your body.
Right.
No matter how diligent you are, no matter what you're trying to do, you live in a bubble, you're still going to have toxins in your body. And so I would believe that you could take this the rest of your life every day, even in high doses, and you'll never be in danger of removing anything healthy.
And is it safe for children?
Absolutely safe for children. Dose is dependent. Certainly, as I said, there's no toxic dose. I mean, the biggest issue I have is my 5-year-old daughter will take a bottle and I'll find her drinking it. So just walk around the house drinking it. But whenever she sees me take my drops, she wants her drops. So I don't know if there's a perceived benefit or she just wants to be all grown up, but certainly it's not dangerous. My boys are 11 and 9, and my daughter's 5, and my boys get probably 3 to 4 drops twice a day, and my daughter gets probably 2 to 3 drops 2 to 3 times a day, and I think that's probably plenty for them at their age.
What's the youngest just you can start with?
I'd say pregnancy is the youngest you can start. So you can start in the womb.
Okay. So even a day-old can have
even a day-old, yeah, even a day-old, because you're born with all these toxins. So the pregnant mother should be using it, the nursing mother should be using it, and certainly you can give it to the child as well.
Hey, Rick, if you like, you can just type in the chat box and just let us know how you're doing, and we can go as long as you want to go, but we just definitely don't want to keep you on for too long, okay?
Well, I actually have to be at an auction at 7 in the morning, so if
okay.
I would love to wrap this up, but I want to make sure that all the important questions are answered.
Here's a thought Sherry gave, and maybe we could send this to your assistant. Would it be possible for us to just have a Word document, have these questions together, and then have someone just type out the answers or direct?
Yeah, that would be fine. That would be fine.
Right.
But if you want to scan them, if there's anything that's really a burning question, I mean, you've asked some very good questions. If there's anything that has to be answered while everyone's still on the phone, I'd love to do that.
Okay. Sherry, you have anything there?
Oh, gosh. because Rick, we'll keep typing questions for hours. This is a very curious bunch that we have. Let's see, there was one. Okay, if somebody's been taking the detox doses for over 3 months and they're still living in New York City, they're just wondering if you're living in a pretty toxic environment, is it okay to just keep taking the detox doses? Or
yeah, absolutely. That's what I point out, that there was no upper limit, there was no upper dose. When we did the first study in healthy individuals, and we saw a 4 to 7-fold increase in heavy metal excretion, by the time we hit day 30, their excretion levels came down dramatically. In fact, they came down to baseline levels, which meant that healthy individuals, after about 30 days taking a detox dose, had cleaned out those circulating heavy metals, at least the 8 heavy metals we were looking at. And that's why we say 30 days of the detox dose, and then you could take the maintenance dose. But with the coal miners, even after 90 days taking the high dose, the detox dose of the product, they were still excreting very high levels of heavy metals. And so we can only assume that's because of continued exposure. And so if you're going to have continued exposure, you should continue to take higher doses of the product.
Right. That makes sense. Dr. Marvin, do you have anything else that came to mind? Dr. Marvin? Okay, it looks like his...
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, okay. Go ahead.
No, I just, I've been just really impressed by this presentation, and I can see where this is something that really needs to be, spread the news about what this will do. And I can think of a lot of people that I've had that had hemochromatosis that I wish I'd have had this product for. And I didn't.
Yeah, that was a surprising finding. I was thrilled to find that out, because I would never tell people, don't have phlebotomy, just try this. But this was just a simple side effect of taking the product.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And children with iron toxicity, it would work in them too.
Well, I would assume, but it depends whether it's acute. If I had a kid that got into a medicine chest and ate a whole bottle full of iron supplements, I would still rush him to the hospital for emergency detox, because that's just too dangerous. So when you're talking about acute toxicity, it should be treated in an emergency room. But if this is just a child that has regular iron overloads, much like hemochromatosis, they should certainly use the product.
Right. Sounds great to me.
Well,
I think everything's been covered.
Oh, great, great. And we can still send you the...
Yeah, please send me the document, and I'll make sure that it gets right back to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We'll just put that on the website for folks, so you can go to our website, and then the answers to your questions will be there somewhere, so you can just pick them up. I'll listen to them. Again, I just want to say thank you so much again, Rik, for taking out of your busy schedule. Interesting thing, Sherry. We are ending with, we've lost like 100 people, because obviously people have other things to do, but we're ending with more people on Rik's webinar than we've had at our very best.
I know, after 2.5 hours, so this is great.
This is really great. This is really great. So thank you again, Rik. I know
absolutely my pleasure, and let me know when you'd like to do this again. This is a great experience.
Is that an open invitation to come for us to give for you to come back again?
Absolutely, but I'm sure Dean told you about my travel schedule. So let's just make sure we know when it's going. We can book it, and then let it fit into my schedule, and then we'll have even more time to get more people on the call.
Oh, great! That's great. Great. Well, we appreciate it, and you have a great night. And thank you all of you for hanging on and staying with us for the webinar, and we'll see you Thursday.
Yes. Good night, everybody.
David?
Bye.
David?
Yes, sir.
Can I be sure and tell Dr. Murray Thursday night that I was tied up, but I would love to have heard him.
I'll let him know, and then we'll send you the files,
He's a
the
very
audio
good
and
friend
the
of
video.
mine.
Yes,
He's a very good friend.
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys have a lot of things in common. You guys are both very, very smart people, for sure.
Well, he's a wonderful guy, and I wish I could hear him.
Well, he'll be on a lot more times in the future, too, so.